So I'd like to start with the outlook for the advertising industry. After a difficult patch at the start of the pandemic, recovery seems to be underway. But how do you see that momentum playing out?
Well, Ivan, you just slipped into the trap that everybody falls into, and that is not defining the industry. There are two planets here. There's a digital planet, which is high growth and continued high growth, and there's a traditional media planet, which is slow growth or no growth, and that's what you refer to in terms of recovery. The digital planet has been going along at a rapid rate, uh, pretty much from the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, before the pandemic, obviously, but the pandemic really, we saw a stutter in our business, I think, for about 2 weeks, the last week of March and then the first week of April. And then we saw liftoff on animation, on robotic photography, on moving from live events to online events. In fact, Media Monks was voted number one out of 500 hybrid event companies in a recent survey. We were somewhat surprised because we'd never featured in it before. So what you saw was an immediate pivot on the digital planet, whereas the traditional planet took a long time to pick up again, and we've seen a surge driven by the fiscal and monetary stimulus. And I think there's an important point here. There are two tailwinds driving those two planets, or driving both of them. One of them is driving both of them at the same time, and that is GDP growth driven by the fiscal and monetary stimulus. The other, digital transformation, just is the tailwind for the digital planet. The traditional industry will not benefit as a result of that. So to sum up, I'm bullish on the rest of 21. I'm bullish on 22 because GDP growth this year is going to be 5 to 6% globally, next year 4 to 5%. But in 2023, the rubber hits the road for the traditional industry because there'll be no tailwind from GDP growth, whereas on the digital planet, we'll continue to benefit from the tailwind from digital transformation. So I think you have to distinguish between what's happening in traditional media and what's happening in new media. So, for example, Google, Facebook, and Amazon will see an incremental $100 billion this year in digital advertising spending out of a total market, including traditional, of 650 billion, and excluding, just focusing on the digital planet, as I call it, of around 350, 375, 400 billion. So the digital companies, and S4 is a royalty on the growth of the digital platforms, software companies and hardware companies, continue to do well even through the pandemic, because the pandemic accelerated digital transformation.
Right, that's a good point. And you've said before you see digital ad spending accounting for about 70% of the industry by 2024.
Right.
After cracking the 50% tipping point last year. What are some of the implications of crossing that threshold, and how are you positioning around it?
Well, we position ourselves, purely digital, or digital natives and digital first. We position ourselves as a data-driven model, which we are, personalization at scale, using data to create, produce, and distribute digital advertising content through digital media. We go to market as faster, better, cheaper. Agility is key to your question. Agility is absolutely key. That's the key corporate attribute before the pandemic, increasingly so in the pandemic and after. Better means understanding the digital ecosystem. And then finally, cheaper means about efficiency. It's, there was a fad after the great financial crisis of 2008 for zero-based budgeting. That has been sort of devalued by the fact that nixed spending on brand, but more importantly on innovation, and it was seen to be not as effective. So, but efficiency in a low inflation world, and we are getting more inflation at the moment, but in a world since 2008 where we've had very little inflation, been very little pricing power, so efficiency is really important. And then the final feature that we go to market as is a unitary structure, not siloed. No factions within the organization sort of fighting against one another for position or growth, but we grow as one company. We grow as one P&L with no cross-charging. So I think agility is key. First-party data is key because Google has made decisions in relation to a cookieless world, and Apple have made decisions in regard to IDFA, which mean that first-party data, that is data owned by clients, consented by consumers, that they mix and match with signals from the platforms, from Google and Facebook and Amazon and Tencent and Alibaba and TikTok being the 6 primary networks, if you like, or primary platforms, and then other platforms such as Twitter and Snap and Pinterest, which are smaller, Kalshu, which are smaller, but becoming, to some extent, more important. So really mixing those signals in first-party data, and then really taking back control, I think, is important as well. I think clients have surrendered too much control to outside parties, particularly after 2008 and the great financial crisis, and they have to take back much more control. So really agility, first-party data, and controlling the process in a 24/7 always-on world, as you know from Bloomberg, being on top of things and being able to react to things in a nanosecond is really important.
Yeah, I was going to ask about these big shifts in the tech world, the eventual phasing out of cookies that Google has announced and some of the changes to tracking that Apple is making. I mean, are these going to create huge ripple effects?
Well, they've created tremendous uncertainty. There's no such thing as a marketing VIX index, but if there was a marketing VIX index, it's gone through the roof. And we've seen that with our data and analytics practice. I mean, we have 3 practices, one around content, one around data and analytics and digital media, and now one around technology services. So we go after the CMO, the CSO being the chief sales officer, and the CIO, the chief information or chief technology officer, in our pursuit of digital marketing transformation. But that's created, what you said about Apple and Google has created tremendous uncertainty. So the marketing VIX index has gone through the roof, and our data and analytics practice, which looks at trying to unify first-party data, taking all the sources of first-party data and melding them together, and then leveraging that with the signals from the big platforms and using that to personalize content at scale, that has become really front and center, really important in a world where there is so much uncertainty. Google, as you know, announced actually more than a year ago. There was the first blog about it, the cookieless world. They then this year sort of upped the process, but then in response to some client reaction and other reaction, they've delayed the phasing out of third-party cookies for what I guess another 18 months. It was originally 2 years. So that uncertainty has created a tremendous amount of focus around the importance of first-party data and melding that with other sources. Third-party data really has slipped out slipped off the table in a way. I mean, there are still third-party data sources that you can use, but their effectiveness is not as great as they were when we had third-party cookies. So that focus really has created a tremendous opportunity for us because of the uncertainty it's created.
I'm glad you brought up the services that you want to offer too, because I think it's very interesting that it's an area you're expanding into. And I just wanted to ask maybe the last question, how does that services practice fit within your broader advertising company? And is that where the industry is headed more broadly?
Well, I think a lot of people in our industry, or in the traditional industry, on that traditional planet, look back to the past, the days of Don Draper and Mad Men with rose-tinted spectacles, and life has changed. Data doesn't destroy creativity. Many people in our industry think it does. I totally disagree with that. It informs creativity and provides insights. I mean, somebody asked me yesterday, what books I would recommend on marketing. I still go back to David Ogilvy's book on advertising and his other books. He wrote a number of books with Ogilvy on advertising. Now, in that, he talks about the importance of market research. You remember that he, as a younger man, before he started Ogilvy at the age of 40, worked at Gallup. He sold Arga cookers, but he also worked at Gallup. He understood the importance of data and the importance of in insight informing how you created content and how you produced and distributed it. So in a way, it's back to the future, but in a much more sophisticated way. And in this new world, we have to use the data that we have to inform the creative and distribute it in the right way. So it's a very different world that we're operating in, and we can't look back. And the nature of creativity has changed, and maybe this might be anathema to the traditional exponents of our industry, but it may be that consumers' attention spans have become much shorter. It may be that the nature of long-term brand building has changed. It's become very much more activational, and we certainly see that. And what we're doing at S4 through Media Monks is building a network from the ground up. As a client at one of the FANGs said to me last week, and my colleague Wes Tahar said that we were doing something uniquely by building from production upwards and building a network around production, the creative end. To your point about technology services, we're starting in the creative area. We're working with chief sales officers and chief marketing officers, and moving now through technology services to chief information officers, and having what I call the full set. But what we focus on is what we make. And this chief creative officer, one of the FANGs, said to us he believes that that's the way to go. There's this much people tend to sort of denigrate production houses and production, and like, wrong. That's the heart of what we make. That's the quality what we produce, and that's where we start and develop. So we're building a network effectively from the ground up, and it's a very new model, which, as I said to you at the very beginning, really is a royalty on the growth of the platforms, the hardware companies, and the software companies.
And to the point about the growing importance of data, as the digital spending continues to take over market share, that data only becomes more important. And it seems to me like there's almost a fight underway for who will control that data. Will it be the big tech companies? Will it be the agencies? Maybe even some of the clients? How do you see that playing out, and who do you think holds the keys here?
Well, I think the key thing is the clients. I mean, the clients have the data, first-party data by definition. There's a lot of misinformation. I think when agencies talk about data, whether it be at Kantar or Axiom or Epsilon or Merkle, really what they're talking about is third-party data. It's not first-party data. The people who control the first-party data are the clients. Now, the tech companies have signals that from consumers in response to creative initiatives or digital media or whatever. So you meld, if the third party part of this has been sort of deprecated, what you have to do is meld the first party piece of it, that's the consumer data that you have as a client. You have to meld that together with the signals that you get from the platform. So the answer to your question, it's going to be clients first, tech platforms seconds, and the agency holding companies a long way back third. That is not going to be sufficient for them to establish any meaningful, I think, database relationship. The core is in the client data. And of course, the clients have a lot of problems because some of them have grown by acquisition. Some of them have had different people in different functions building different databases. They don't talk to one another. So the key at the beginning, when I refer to the marketing VIX index, it's not, you don't have to be an Einstein to figure this one out. There's a lot of data that doesn't fit together and doesn't talk to one another. So the first job is to get that right. For example, when we work with Mondelez, and a good example of it, they've started to get that right first, use that first party data together with the signals from Google or Facebook and Amazon in the West, and deploy that in the most effective way. So I think, Ivan, the first two will definitely it'll be client first and platform hardware software companies second.
And when you're looking out at the landscape of the big tech companies, how do you feel about your options in terms of Google and Facebook being very strong players. Amazon also developing a very strong business. Do you think that they'll consolidate their leading positions, or do you see competition increasing?
That's a hot topic.
Yeah.
I think it's, from a regulatory point of view, it's going to be quite difficult for the big boys and girls to expand their position through deals or acquisitions. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens with MGM and Amazon. That's on a much smaller scale in the context of Amazon, but I think it's going to be difficult for them to grow through acquisition. But it will continue to be, I think, organic growth will continue to be the way that they grow. And the simple fact is, with the current controversy around Facebook, I mean, I think Facebook has to respond to that controversy, and has to work out, a better way of dealing with the criticism, whether the criticism is valid or invalid. They have to respond more. They have hired 35 to 40,000 people to monitor content. They may have to do more. For example, they may have to modify the way they go around. They implement the algorithm. So there are lots of things that I think they will do. But the simple fact is that those 6 platforms, and there are 3 in the West: Google, Facebook, Amazon; 3 in the East: Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok, ByteDance. TikTok is the only one, Ivan, that's gained traction. It's about 32 billion. Google this year will go, this is ad revenues, probably will go to about I think 220, from about 180 billion to about 210, 220 billion. Facebook will go from about, despite the pressure, and we'll see what happens in their Q3 results at the end of the month, from about 80 to 110, maybe a bit more. And Amazon will go from 25 to 35. So you are seeing growth, and TikTok is the only one at 32 billion. The latest statistic I've seen for ByteDance, TikTok. You go down then to Snap and Twitter, which are both at about 4.5 billion, and then Pinterest, which is smaller. So, the simple fact is that those platforms, I think, will continue to dominate the digital advertising marketplace. But that provides, I think, sufficient choice. There are contenders, and we'll see how they develop over time. But I think that inevitably those platforms that we've touched on are going to continue to have a very strong position. Not, as I say, I think, through deals and through acquisitions, but I think more through sort of natural organic growth.
And to ask a bit about the East-West divide as well, I know you have a presence in China, and there's been a lot of uncertainty there, I guess, for investors over the last few months.
I think that's the biggest issue. I mean, we all focus quite rightly on the negative impacts of globalization and retraining and reskilling, the obviously climate change, obviously the pandemic, Brexit, DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion. We worry all about these massively important issues. But I think the thing that, from a commercial point of view, that is the biggest issue to deal with is China-US relations, or the lack of them. And it's not something that has happened under the Biden administration. It was true of the Trump administration, obviously, and before that, the Obama administration. So it's been there. There's been a Cold War. I think it was Hank Paulson at one of the Bloomberg conferences in Singapore about, maybe it's 4 years ago, who started to talk about the Cold War. And there is a bit of a Cold War there. And we've seen it with the AUKUS nuclear submarine alliance with Australia, the UK, and the US. Tensions are running high. We've had more on Taiwan and what may or may not happen in Taiwan. This is a really serious issue. You can't ignore China, in my view, and in many others' views. It is the second largest economy. It will be the largest economy in the world, whether the West likes it or not. I believe in long-term historical trends. China was on the wrong side of history for a couple of hundred years, but the early 19th century led the world from a GDP point of view, and it will do so again. So we have to find some way of accommodating both countries. And it is very difficult. I've noticed a change amongst Chinese millennials. We've noticed from the data becoming much more nationalistic, as we see in other countries in the world, much less pro-Western than they were before. So I think you have to look at this issue is a real issue. Now, we doubled up in China when we merged Media Monks with Tomorrow in Shanghai in January this year. And I think we will triple up, if I can put it like that, in China pretty soon. But I am concerned about whether our clients and indeed ourselves have the right structures with a move to more localization. I think you have to understand what President Xi is doing with the 14th 5-year plan. You have to really understand what he's trying to do with his new systems, the dual circulation system, what he's trying to do at home and what he's doing abroad. And then you have to understand the Chinese climate and environment much. And that might lead to structural changes in your organization. It may be that, 100% ownership or different styles of ownership or structures become more important. And I know, I was in Germany. I'm in Germany at the moment, and I was in Germany at the time of the election. And what was noticeable that the number one issue for German companies is China-US relationships and the uncertainty around that. What do you do when your largest market or your second largest market or your third largest market is China, and we have this friction? We have to find a way through. I'm not clever enough or expert enough to say what that solution is, but I think it is, number one, it's good to hear that President Xi and President Biden are going to have another summit, albeit virtual, I think, before the end of the year. But we need a little bit of action, I think, as well as talk, to try and bring things together, because it does threaten, a split does threaten the global economy.
All right. I think is that where we should leave things.
Okay.